Thank you.
Oh, sure, no problem. Yes, thank you. And, I didn't see the little light a minute ago. I thought I was lucky. And, but anyways, let me emphasize that we are living in a very exciting time for science, and you are so lucky to be at the stage of your career that you are at this very moment. We have so much information and so much technology available to us to begin to do science in ways that I couldn't even imagine when I was your age. We have informations of entire genomes, chemical libraries. We have these amazing microscopes that can measure even single molecules and manipulate them. And the computers that we have are beyond anything that was even conceivable to us 20, 25 years ago. And the truth of the matter is, when I was your age, the things that we could do now as scientists and in the scientific environment were referred to as science fiction. It was not even considered to be real because it was the imagination of authors and scientists of what would be possible. And the reality is we're doing all of this now. If you go back and you watch cartoons from when I was, a child, things like we're doing right now, talking to each other on a video screen, these were shown on the Jetsons and all of these other cartoons, where at the time it just seemed completely unbelievable. And you have all of these things at your fingertips. And I really believe this is super exciting and a wonderful opportunity for you that I want you to just embrace and be aware of, because you really are only limited by your ability of what you can actually think of in your imagination, so to speak. We're also living in an important time for science. I think all of you, particularly the younger people, are far more aware of this than my generation is, and certainly more than the average individual who's even a generation preceding mine. It's a very important time, and I remind you that your job and your obligation as a scientist is to seek the truth. And this is what we do as scientists. We may want something to happen, we may think something will happen, but our job is to report what actually happens. We do experiments, we make observations, we analyze data, and then we communicate that. This is our contribution, is the truth. And as a result, the importance of speaking the truth is absolutely central to our mission. If we want the general public to have faith in what we do, we have to speak truthfully about everything that we do. The strengths, the advantages, the limitations, the weaknesses, the assumptions, all of these things, the transparency in what we do is central for getting the support and commitment of the rest of the communities that are outside of the immediate scientific community for which we serve. And it's also super important to speak for the truth. We have to defend the truth of science and research and education, particularly when it's denied. And I emphasize this not as a political statement. Anyone who knows me, I avoid doing that as much as possible. But I emphasize and assert that everything that we do relies on the truth. And if we let it be denied, then everything that we do begins to be questioned, and everything that we do as scientists begins to fall apart. And this is our job as scientists when serving the general population and communities throughout the world. And as a result, we really do need you for the next 30, 50 years to be doing this. And I emphasize, I think is the title, that without each other, we are nothing. And I love this because the messages that I've received when I was your age, and I believe probably the messages many of you still hear, is that science is competitive and cutthroat, and you've got to try to do better, and you're surrounding yourself with this sentiment that the enemy is your colleague. And that's not the truth. And I really don't believe that. And I don't think you need to subscribe to that to be a good, happy, productive scientist who contributes to the advancement of knowledge. I will say that we are a community. As a result, we rely on each other for it to exist, and as we know, to be healthy and inclusive. We have to respect each other's data, opinions, and values. You know, I'll make another comment. If anyone has seen the election debate just a couple of days ago, we may not remember anything that was said, but we will surely never forget the fiasco that happened when people disrespected each other in public. And we have to respect each other, our data, our opinions, and our values. It's something that I refer to as intellectual flexibility. You know, you can't think that because you are a wet lab experimentalist that you have a key to knowledge that a computational or a scientist or a theorist does not have as well. You have to understand that everyone can contribute, and every field and every method of science has something to contribute uniquely. And this is general. This applies to everything, not just science. So I am in a university, and I live in the college with many students, many of whom are science majors or STEM majors, but a significant fraction of them are not. And we all know that the humanities and the social sciences are suffering, and they're suffering at the expense of science in many respects, because science is growing, the interest in science and STEM is growing rapidly. And as a result, the non-STEM faculty and researchers and scholars are feeling left out. And I really believe that part of my job as a head of college at the university is to defend the non-STEM disciplines and remind the students that they still contribute and will always contribute to our identity as humans. I also emphasize, as is happening right now, to listen and engage one another. You know, how many of you have gone to a conference? Okay, I know they're all virtual now, but how many of you have gone to a conference and you're standing in front of your poster by yourself, dressed up like super nice, right? And you're waiting for someone to come by. You know, and when someone comes by, it's really sweet, right? You're like really happy. It's like, okay, look, wow, I just spent like years of my life on this. Let me tell you about it in 5 minutes, right? And it's wonderful. Everything you do in just a brief moment just gets validated, and it's so inspiring. But now let's be honest with each other. How many of you have been to a conference and seen someone standing in front of their poster, and then you're like, oh man, I'm trying not to make eye contact, but just gonna keep walking and go somewhere else? I mean, look, we've all done it because there's only so much we could do. And so I challenge all of you, wherever you have the opportunity to see each other, listen and engage one another. You have to care. Even if you're not interested in the topic, sometimes I will go to students' posters on things I know little or nothing about and has nothing to do with my areas of research. But I do know that that student is interested in that, and I want to know why. So if you see someone, ask them if they've got a poster and go and talk to them and hear why they're excited about what they do. That, it will always, always keep you motivated, even if your work has nothing to do with what they're talking about. Because what we do is transfer knowledge. This is our product, right? This is what we do. We learn things and we tell each other about it, and we all get smarter. It's like that's it. You know, I'm not baking anything. You know, you don't get to eat anything that I make. You don't get to wear it, but you get to think about it. And that's what we do. And we have to do this for each other with the intention that we will all have meaning in what we do because of it. And I want to talk about, how do you know your talents? This is a question I get from students all the time. It's like, I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know what I want to do. Whether you're an undergraduate student or a graduate student, or even my kids who are, you know, 12 and 9, or, you know, are like, I think I'm good at this, Dad. You know, should I try to do this? We're always trying to find out what it is that we're good at, so that we can pursue it and embrace it and be excited about it. And this is central to having a successful or happy and fulfilling career path. How do I know my talents? I'll tell you. Okay, my mom and dad. Okay, so I was, as Marilu said, I'm a first-generation American. My mother, father, and sister were born in Cuba. This is a picture of my mother, my father, and my big sister. This photograph was taken when my father reunited with my wife after several years of being separated. So my mother and father were married. They were, yeah, probably about your age, early 20s. Okay, they were married and living in Cuba. This was in the early 60s. Political turmoil, revolution, etc. My mother was pregnant with my sister when my father left Cuba to come to the United States. He ended up going to Dallas. Eventually, he ended up in New Jersey, which I'll show you in just a moment. My mother had a hard time leaving Cuba. The government was ensuring that people stayed behind to support the cause, the future of the revolution. And although my father was able to leave because he left pretty early on, my mother had a difficult time leaving. And it took her a few years. And my father did not see his daughter, my sister, until this photograph was taken. She was already a couple of years old. And I find this photograph profound because it's my mother and father at a time where they're younger than I am by far right now. It reveals the fragility that they have. It reveals the love that they have for each other. And it also reminds me of the sacrifices that parents make for their children. And if, you know, there are days where I'm like, man, I do so much for my kids. It's like, it doesn't compare to the sacrifices that many parents make for their children. And I'm indebted to them to this day. And I am very well aware of everything they've done to make my life possible. As I mentioned, I was born in Newark, New Jersey. Many of you may not know where that is. Many of you may know it because of the airport. It's a little map right there. You can see a little red dot that I put on the Google Maps right there. But when I was a kid in the 1970s, Newark was a pretty rough place. Like many cities in the United States, they suffered economically with unemployment and just a complete negligence of the city. Public schools were really quite I don't want to say bad, but challenged. And as a result, my parents moved. We literally moved right there, just like a half a mile away, right across the river, to a town called Kearney, because they had very good public schools. I was going to a Catholic school. My brother, sister, and I were going to Catholic schools in Newark. And the truth of the matter is, my mother working in a hospital in Manhattan, and my dad working as a welder in a factory in Newark, we simply couldn't afford it. So we moved over to Kearney, and I grew up there from 3rd grade on, and I graduated high school from there in 1987, for those of you who want to do the math and figure out how old I am. But I attribute the awareness to my parents. There's this quote that I like by Joseph Goldstein, The Experience of Insight, where he says, if we're facing in the right direction, all we have to do is keep on walking. And I do think that it was my mom and dad that pointed me in the right direction. They didn't tell me to be a scientist. They didn't ask me to be a scientist. But they did say, you have to go to school to do something. I don't care what you do, but you have to do something. Okay? And this was central to the messaging that my parents gave my brother, sister, and I. Because when they left Cuba, they left everything behind, everything. My father came over with a duffel bag, and my mother had a suitcase and a kid. They left family behind, they left everything behind. And I still remember my mother saying to me that an education is the only thing that cannot be taken away from you. I don't know if I agree with that. but it's a testament to the belief that she had in the value of an education and how it can change and impact your life in positive ways. So we had to go to school. My brother, sister, and I all went to college, which is itself a remarkable achievement that my parents were able to accomplish as first-generation Americans. But when I was in high school, I ended up working in a work-study program. I don't even know if this exists anymore, but in high school, you had the opportunity to go to school for half a day and then work for the second half of the day. So you'd go in the morning, you'd take like English, gym, math, the things that were needed for the state requirements, and then you would go work in the afternoon. And most of the time, you know, in that era, the boys or the young men would go and work in machine shops or auto shops or printing presses. And the women would be dental hygienists or secretaries. Sorry, it's the way it was. And thankfully, that has changed considerably, but that's the way that it was back 30, 40 years ago. And I participated in this program where I was able to work at Hoffman La Roche. They just started this program with the high school. And that was amazing because I got to work in a lab, in a pharmaceutical company. And it was just the absolute most amazing experience. I was 16 years old. This was unheard of at the time. And now I know plenty of students do research in high school. Back in 1986, that was unheard of. It just didn't happen. Okay? But it was that experience that made me want to be a scientist or study science. And I applied to one school, Rutgers. Why? Because I'm from New Jersey. And I applied to Rutgers Newark. Why? Because I'm from Newark. It was great. You know, I didn't even know most other schools. I knew very few schools that didn't have the name of a state associated with it. So I applied to one school. Thankfully, I got in Rutgers Newark, and that's where I went. And this is where really all of my life began to change in ways that really contributed to where I am and doing what I am now. Because I participated in this program called the Minority Biomedical Research Support Program that was run by Barry Komisarek. And Barry has been running that show, save a small hiatus he took for a couple of years, for about 30 years now. This is an NIH-funded program that when I started, I realized much later that it was only the second year the program had been in place. And I'm indebted to Barry, not just for running this program, but for initiating and running this program at a time where there was not much resonance for this. You know, he communicated to me what the climate was like at the time. And paraphrasing, you know, he mentioned to me that at the time when he tried to do this, that most of his colleagues, these are educated scientists and scholars, most of them really believed that that underrepresented minorities, these were Blacks and Hispanics, either could not do science or did not want to do science. And so it was a futile effort that was not worth pursuing. And Barry did it. And 30-something years later, it's still going strong. And that's admirable. And without him, he's just changed so many people's lives for the better. And I finished at Rutgers, and then I applied to graduate school, and I went to work with Tom Pollard at Johns Hopkins, got my PhD with him, and then I subsequently went on to work with Mike Ostap and Lee Sweeney at the University of Pennsylvania. And then in 2001, almost 20 years ago, I arrived at Yale University. I didn't have a plan for any of this to happen. And I would like to point something out here. What do you see in front of my screen there? I don't think I can hear you, but I think you see what I see. Okay? You see 4 white dudes. Okay, you know, I didn't have the benefit of having an underrepresented minority as an advisor, but these 4 white men that you see right there changed my life in ways that I could not imagine. And this is a valuable reminder that there are a lot of good people in the world, and they come in all genders, colors, religions, orientations. And we have to stop demonizing people and assuming they're guilty because of the way that they look, and the privileges we attribute to them without actually having any real knowledge. And I'm indebted to all of them because they all really cared about me and they invested in me. And on a good day, I think I am just a good example of what happens when good people take interest and invest in the well-being and career development of others by not keeping their own best interest in mind. And I thank them, and I'm well aware that without their help, I would not be here right now talking to you. And so, how to know your talents? Somebody knows, and you have to use them. And I will say that I would like to say that I knew I was going to be doing this and I was well aware of all of my skills and I am so awesome. But I'm not. I'm clumsy and awkward and I still feel unprepared for everything that I do in my life. But these people right here were my coaches and they helped me and they saw things in me that I didn't. And as a result, the trust that they placed in me was reciprocated by trust that I placed in them. And I followed through with what I was, with the career path that I really wanted to do, but was admittedly scared to pursue for many valid reasons. I want to point something out because I think it's funny. Here's a picture of me. I don't know if you can see it. I don't know if you can see my little mouse, but that's me all the way over here with the hair and the sneakers. This is the Cooperative Health Organization. This is the work study program. Because I was doing biomedicine, I was in the same group with all the dental hygienists. But here's the part that I really think's amusing, and it's not, I'm not gloating or mocking myself, but it's something I think is really important. A few years ago, I was at my mom's house and I was digging through my old junk drawer. We all have a junk drawer. And I looked in that drawer and I found one of my old high school report cards, okay? And so if you look there, there's my report card, okay? Do you remember, I'm in a molecular biophysics and biochemistry class, guys, okay? Right? Listen up. I'm a biophysicist, okay? I do math every day. And then when I look at my grade in high school, in math, I got D's and C's, okay? What's amazing is I got an A in gym. Anyone who knows me, this is not an A in gym, I can assure you, okay? You know, and I thought I was really struck by this because I didn't really remember this. But it's a valuable reminder that the rest of your life isn't cut out for you. I could have chosen right here and tell myself, no, I'm just not good in math, so I'm gonna do something else. But I didn't let the past determine my future. I worked hard. And when I got to college, I took a fair bit of mathematics and I read many of these Shams outline books to catch up on the mathematics that I didn't get in high school. And I subsequently did that going to graduate school when I pursued a degree in molecular biophysics. And the lesson there is not, hey, you can get a D and still do this, but it is. It's to not think that the rest of your life is limited because of a perceived failure or deficiency. It just means there's something you need to work on, and you're fully capable of it. And now I do math every day. I would never have known. If I could go back and live my life again, I'd pay attention in math class. And so I said, knowledge is power, okay? This is true, but power really only makes sense, at least to me, when its leadership is a leadership of service. And I say this because I think of what I do as a scientist. I know I have a position of influence, and I think of what have I done with this position, this leadership position that I have been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to hold. And then I go back and I think of my lab, and here's the lab. This is my lab over many years. You can see it changes in size and number, in the backgrounds can even change. And it's been really, just really incredibly fulfilling. I've had over 50 trainees that have gone on to do amazing things in all kinds of areas of science. And I'll tell you very briefly what they've done, since we are talking about science. As Marilu said, I work on the actin cytoskeleton. We study how these cells move. And because of the diverse group of individuals that we have together, we've approached these problems using many, many different approaches. We can look at cells, we can reconstitute these beads moving with purified protein components. We can look at these things in the microscope, and here's a picture of a protein that binds to an actin filament and then starts to break it, and you'll see it just go tra, tra, tra. It'll break it, and we understand that. And then I get the physicists and the mathematicians, and we generate these mathematical models, and then we make these very specific predictions, and then we go back and we test them inside cells based on all of this. And all of these different approaches are done by different people working together as a team. We also work on these RNA helicases, which is a project that I just absolutely love. Quite simply, if there's RNA anywhere, there's a protein around it that's doing something with it. It's called the helicase. It'll unwind it, it'll help refold it, it'll affect the way it interacts with proteins. And basically, if there's any process involving RNA, there's one of these helicase proteins there associated with it. We've been focusing on ones involved in ribosome biogenesis as well as RNA transport. And the question we're really interested in, we've known, the field has known for many decades that it burns ATP as fuel, and in burning this fuel, it will unwind or do other things to the RNA. And as a chemist, I'm interested in all of the little steps that happen in between. And while this cartoon is lovely, this is kind of what it looks like if you think like a chemist. It actually looks like these little chemical reactions. And when you start to actually consider all of the components that are in there, this is what it actually starts to look like. And these people, the students and the postdocs in my lab, have all worked together to identify all of these little individual reactions, and they make these little cartoons of how this can happen. And this ends up in the little textbooks. Okay, and that's been incredibly exciting and fulfilling. And then the last project that I work on is a wonderful collaboration that I've had with my very good friend Dimitrios Braddock. We work together on proteins involved in blood clotting, stroke prevention, cancer cell migration, as well as calcification of heart and vessels. And I want to tell you just very briefly in one slide about this project. It is a disease called Generalized Arterial Calcification of Infancy. It's a severe autosomal recessive disorder. Most of the patients or the babies die within the 6 months of life because of heart failure. This photo that you see there is a rare case of an individual who actually survived. And these are all caused by mutations in this one protein called ENPP1. Actually, not all, 80% of the diseases of genotypes are caused by a mutation in ENPP1. And there's no treatment for this, this disease at all that arises from a dysfunction of this enzyme. So Dimitrios and I, we worked on these proteins for many years, and we understood how they worked. And Dimitrios decided, sorry, Dimitrios, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Dimitrios decided to put this, let me lower this volume, let me put this back, sorry. Dimitrios decided, you know, we have this enzyme, we've been working on this enzyme, the disease results from a dysfunction of this enzyme. Can we add this back and recover a normal phenotype? And so here's a movie of two mice that are genetically identical. The difference between them is their size, their mass, their ability to move. You can see them right there. One of them looks like a normal mouse. The other one looks like a mouse that's lethargic and not moving and incapable of holding itself up. The difference between these two is that the one that looks like a normal mouse had this enzyme that we worked on injected. And as a result, it's basically an enzyme replacement therapy for this mouse that recovered the normal phenotype of a normal mouse with a subcutaneous injection. And because of this, there's now a company, an Enzyme LLC, that is developing this enzyme as a therapeutic to use in humans. Okay, so why am I telling you all of this? Okay, because it's easy to look back and say, well, yes, no, I had just great ideas, you know, I had this ability to connect dots that other people couldn't see, et cetera. We all hear that from people that are really enamored with themselves. But I pay close attention to the choices that I make in life. And I didn't see any of these things coming. Okay, so how did I choose these projects? Okay, Actin, fill, and assembly. I was just curious. I started working on this because there were some things that I generally didn't understand. And then looking more closely, I realized that I didn't understand them because they didn't really make much sense. But it was purely my pure interest in this that got me to work on this. It wasn't like I had this vision that there were these unanswered questions lying on the horizon. It was just, I didn't understand it. And then in trying to understand it, I realized that there was some things that we thought that maybe weren't right. That was in fact the case, and 20 years later, I'm still working on it. RNA helicase motor proteins, okay? I'd like to say that I saw an opportunity here in this field that was emerging. But the truth of the matter is I was having lunch with my colleagues, Tom Stites and Peter Moore, who are these very famous structural biologists that worked on helicases. And I would ask them questions over lunch. Oh, tell me about your work. What do you do? And then I would ask all these naive questions. And I realized that they didn't know the answer to them. They're like, well, we don't know this. We don't know that. And I was like, well, is someone looking at this? And they said, well, not so much. So then I started working on it. It was great. It was wonderful. And then my favorite of all, how did I start working with my colleague Dimitrios? I had a student in my class that was a student in his lab. And I was teaching about how to fit and analyze experimental data. And he said, hey, I've got some data. Maybe I can use what I learned in class to analyze the data from my research. And I said, sure, why don't you call your PI and we'll get together and we'll do it together. And we did. And 17 years later, Dimitrios and I are still working together on many, many different projects, but it was all driven by a shared interest in helping an undergraduate student. And so how do you achieve scholarship? Believe in your work and what you do. There's so much pressure on you to figure out what should I work on? What's gonna be hot? What's gonna get me a job? The reality is, if you ask me, if you have interest and passion, the opportunities will come from your effort and your dedication to solving those. Now, how to deal with failure or pressure to be perfect or to be like your peers. I think this is used in a car commercial, but I love Oscar Wilde, one of my favorite writers. Favorite book ever is one of his. And he said, be yourself, everyone else is already taken. That's wonderful. It's a useful reminder. But one thing I will say is that this, for sure, is the one thing that you are better at than anybody else in the world. For sure. We are all better at something than everyone else, and it's being ourselves. And so there's no reason why we shouldn't have conviction for who we are. No one can do that better. And so be yourself. I understand there's pressure, and I understand that a lot of it comes from others, but my experience tells me that most of this pressure is self-inflicted. Most of it comes from yourself. And so just be fair to yourself. You know, I know that's obvious, and I know it's hard, but just be fair to yourself and be kind to yourself. And always try to see yourself for the person that you want to be, you know. And if you do that, you will do that for others, and everyone will benefit. But just be yourself. Now I want to actually share something with you, okay, that I've struggled with, and I found very eye-opening. This is my PhD thesis advisor, who's now my colleague at Yale, former dean of my graduate school. I adore this guy, absolutely adore him. He's changed my life, saved my life, I would say. And he and I were serving on a advisory board for a research center up in Hartford, Connecticut. And he says, hey, let's go up, we'll drive up together. Okay, so it's a 45-minute drive, let's go together. I was like, okay, sounds good. It's only 45 minutes. But if you have to spend 45 minutes in the car alone with your PhD thesis advisor, doesn't matter if it's 30 years later, guys, I'm telling you, it's gonna feel like you're going to California, all right? like by foot, all right? It takes a long time. You're like watching the miles. It's like, please no traffic, please no traffic, you know? And I said, I actually adore this guy, all right? But it's still, okay. But what was really wonderful is probably about, 2/3 of the way up there, I finally get around to talking to him about things that actually really matter and about things that I'm dealing with, that I'm keeping to myself or talking about with my wife, but not talking about with my scientific mentors. And then I ask him, I just reach out to him and I said, Tom, it's like, I don't know, I'm having a really hard time these days, for the past year and I can't get out of this funk. And he was like, what's up? I was like, I feel like I've worked really hard, and I'm always working, and I've done things that I could never even imagine. I'm at an amazing university. I've got tenure. I've got a funded research lab. I'm head of an undergraduate college. I'm surrounded by people that trust and respect me, every day. But somehow I'm just kind of like, it's just not really doing it for me so much anymore. And he says to me, he asked me, he goes, well, what's wrong? What are you talking about? And I said, I don't know. I just, when I pictured my life, at this stage of my life, when I was 20 and I pictured myself in my, 25 years later, this isn't the life that I kind of pictured for myself. I got a tiny little house. I got a 2002 Mazda. It's pretty sweet Mazda, but it's, it's a 2002 Mazda, right? He's like, and I said, I don't know, Tom, I just thought by this stage, I was going to be like sitting at the end of a rainbow in a pot of gold, throwing my money up in the air, right? And before I could even finish my sentence, he cuts me off and he says, you are. And then I paused for a minute because I realized he saw something that I didn't. And then I said to myself, I better go home and think about this. I better go home and think about why someone is telling me that I am sitting in a pot of gold, but somehow I don't see it. And I needed to, and I really went home and I did a lot of deep thinking and introspection. And I asked myself, why am I still a professor? Why do I still do this? It's not the papers. I mean, I love papers. Believe me, I love publishing a paper. But, my goal was to publish 100 papers before I was 50. And when I did that, it kind of loses its excitement a little bit. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to publish more. I'd like to publish more good ones too. Right. But I like learning, but I don't need to do research. I can learn by reading. I can go to seminars. It's like, why do I still do this? Why do I get up and still work 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week? And I had to think about that. And then I remember George Washington Carver's quote, where he said, since new developments are the products of a creative mind, we must therefore stimulate and encourage that type of mind in every way possible. And I remembered why I became a scientist. And I'll share that with you in just a moment. But the thing is that this reminded me that every day that I get up, there are young minds, yourselves included, that my job is to help you and encourage and stimulate you. And I realize that inequalities exist. We're all aware of this, and they just absolutely, this cry injustice, okay? And, you know, this is a very central part to everything I've done as a scientist. I could not separate the education and outreach and support of young people from what I do as a scientist. It's an integral part of what I do. And I went back and I was like, yeah, Enrique, I know that sounds good, nice narrative, but actually let's look at the data, right? And I went back and I looked and I realized that in about 20 years, I've done 100 different things, from science fairs in 3rd grade to talking to faculty who are managing identity, to students such as yourselves in events like this and workshops and all of these things. I've done 120 years, 120 years. And then I said, well, that's great, but well, did it really do anything? Okay, so then I asked my lab, I asked the people in my lab, you know, what do you guys do with this? You know, I don't impose it on you, but you guys know I'm actively involved, and I really try to do this because I feel it's an important part of what we do as scientists. And then what I realized is that just four of my students at the time, they did 15 events in 1 year. And so that's when I realized, it's like, oh, I get it. We're all doing this together. And here's these wonderful photographs of my graduate students and my postdocs doing all kinds of science activities. I was like, okay, this does keep me going. And I felt stimulated, and I felt like I had so much clarity again, because not only am I doing what I wanted to do, I had forgotten, but the people around me are seeing this, and they're leading. They're leading by doing this as well. But what really drove it home for me was when I got an email from one of my former undergraduate students. So this is one of my, in the center is one of my former undergraduate students that worked in the lab. And here she is, she's as a graduate student at Johns Hopkins with 4 of her trainees. And she was so proud of having these undergraduate advisors. And she sent me an email that said, who would have thought that a Puerto Rican girl could teach science to students from other countries at Johns Hopkins? Probably no one. And when she sent me this, she was expressing gratitude and thanking me for everything I did to help her get there. And I can tell you that email and that message and that photo right there made everything absolutely worthwhile. And so, does it really matter though? Okay, hey, what you're doing now, sorry, you know, I'm a scientist. I question everything, including my own actions. Does it really matter? Are we having any effect? So, diversity in science. What progress have we actually made? Okay, so there's a myth. There's a myth that, well, there just aren't any of us. There aren't any underrepresented minorities out there. There's no applicant pool. How many of you have heard that? Olivia and Marie-Luce, you're the only 2 I can see, so represent the general public. All right, I'm going to count on you 2 to survey the community. We've all heard, sorry, Marie-Luce, Olivia, and the other people on this conference that may identify, you're just not there. Well, actually, this paper, Decoupling of the Minority PhD Talent Pool by my friend at the NIH, Kenny Gibbs, and others, they point out that's actually not true. And the fact is, you look at the data, the number of underrepresented minority PhDs and assistant professors has grown. I am way down here in my PhD was granted in 1997. So I'm right down here, 1997, where you can see that curve starting to change a little bit. Okay, the number is growing. Okay, it's still lower than the representative population. Okay, but the pool is not depleted. It exists, and it is not depleted, and it's growing faster than the population growth. And it's also growing at a faster rate than the majority PhDs. So we're there. We are there, and we are ready. So that's the fact. It's a myth that we're not, there's no pool. But the number of PhDs is growing faster than the number of professors. Okay? So how many of you, let me ask again, believe that we should have, Mariluz and Olivia, I'm counting on you to raise your hand if you agree. You don't have to. How many of you believe that there should be more people of color serving in faculty roles? Okay. How many of you feel that if we don't do this, that there will be a very difficult and compromised future for the next generation of scientists that identifies people of color? Okay, so we all agree that it's really important. Okay, I share that belief. Okay, so then another myth that we heard is that the reason that there are no faculty of color is because there are no jobs. How many of you have heard that? There's just no jobs. Okay, there's just no jobs. Okay, yeah, well, all right, there might be truth. Okay, so Kenny and his colleagues did a mathematical model, and this is why I love this paper, because they do biophysics, okay? And they take all of the data that exists and they make mathematical models of what would happen if the world would suddenly change, okay? So we've all been told there are just no jobs. And we're like, make jobs, make jobs, make jobs. We're all saying this, okay? And then we can fill them with people that identify like us. They did this mathematical model, and they showed that creating 100 new jobs each year does nothing. It does nothing at all. The problem will still be there if we make 100 new jobs a year. I found that surprising because I really did believe that we just needed more jobs, okay? And they tested a lot of variables. There's only one thing that'll fix it, okay? One thing will fix it. Increasing the transition rate by 10% has a huge effect. And that just simply means that if 10% more of us decided to be teachers, we'd fix the problem. I did this already. I can't do anything else. I've dedicated my life to be a teacher. We need 10% more of us moving forward to do this. And so why am I bringing this up? Because you've all, Mariluz and Olivia, you've all raised your hands, sharing the importance of this and the urgency of this and the need for this. And I'm just reminding you that only you can fix this. I can't do it. And that's why we're here right now, okay? But realize you are empowered. You're the only ones that can fix this problem. And you have to understand that. I can't fix it. No one my age can fix it. It's really up to you. And so I ask you, what are you going to do? Okay? Being a teacher is not a glamorous job. I love it. I'd do it all over again if I could. I'd take more math, as I said. But no one's out there saying, you know, it's not a medical doctor, it's not a lawyer, it's not a pharmacist, it's not even an engineer, right? You know, Cubans, you know, doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, and engineers, you know, it's like, whoa, you know, it's like, those are amazing. You know, college professor, oh, they must be smart, right? But I'm sorry to put it on you, but you have to understand that only you can fix this problem. Okay, but I know. What's the problem? Is well, I don't know. It's not the best place to be working, not the best thing to be doing. It's just not the place I want to be. No, I understand that. So here's a quote from Julie Freischlag, who is the head of surgery at Johns Hopkins, where surgery started in the United States, and she took over. Okay, she was the head of surgery, first woman to be head of any surgery department in the nation. Okay, and after being there, she writes to the dean of faculty, "I just don't think I fit in." Okay, look, here's an incredibly accomplished woman She's in charge. Yet, while in charge, she still feels out of place. And this is telling me a lot of things. This is telling me that no matter what you achieve in your life, this sense of not fitting in is something you're going to carry with you. And I can tell you, I've been at Yale for 20 years, and I know that my colleagues really appreciate and support and are very proud of me, but I still don't feel like I fit in here. And that's some pretty deep-rooted stuff and baggage that I've been carrying with me since I was in Newark. But I love Janice Clement's response to her. She says, your job isn't to fit in, your job is to lead. And I remind you that, because that is your job. And not fitting in is not one of the job requirements. I'm not dismissing the importance of climate and community and all of this, but I'm just emphasizing the need to lead by example. And then I love this quote by Edward Snowden. Some of you love him, some of you hate him, regardless of how you feel about him. He said something that resonated with me a great deal. We all raised our hands that we believe in the importance of education. We believe in the importance of equity. We know that we are in a state of crisis and we have to do something about this. And he says, if we sacrifice our values because we're afraid, then we don't really care about those values very much. And so if we really believe that this is what needs to be done to fix the problem, then we have to continue working to this. And I ask you, I give you one piece of advice that if you would like some practical advice, this is really all I can give you. I would suggest that right now you get a little piece of paper and you write down on this little piece of paper why you want to be a scientist and why you like science. Okay? Because you're going to forget. And I became a scientist because I wanted to be a teacher. It was those professors at Rutgers and Newark that made me want to be a teacher. I didn't think I'd end up at Yale, but that's what I wanted to do. And probably about 25 years ago, something, I wrote my now wife a letter. We were living apart from each other. And I explained to her what I was thinking of, what I wanted to do in my science with my PhD and all the challenges. I didn't know if I wanted to do a postdoc. I didn't know if I wanted to be a scientist. I just wanted to be close to my family, all of these things. And in there, I said, you know, but if I do end up being a scientist in a university, you know, I really want to do it somewhere where I can do research and I can also teach. Because it's really important for me. And teaching is even more important than the research. And if I could be lucky enough to be at a place where I could do both of them at the same time, I think I'd be really happy. Well, my wife had this love letter, okay? I didn't have it, right? And she found it 20 years later. And she pointed it to me. And she said, why don't you read this? And she said, you're doing exactly what you've always wanted. And you should be happy. And so write it down because you're going to forget. You're going to get caught up in the obligations, in the deadlines, and your insecurities and what I didn't do right today, that you're going to forget about who you really are, because the world changes every day, but you don't. I am still that same kid that I showed you in that photograph from 1985. I haven't changed a lot. I'd like to think I've improved in many ways, but the things that I value and the things that I care about and the reasons that I pursued this career have not. And I want to leave you, I don't even know what time it is, but hopefully I'm not over time. I want to remind you of something Margaret Mead said, amazing anthropologist from the University of Pennsylvania. She said, never believe that a few caring people can change the world, for indeed that's all who ever have. And I'm just reminding you, you really are the future. all of you young people here that are not sure where your future lies, are the ones that are going to make it. And you're going to make it what you want. You really do have the power, and you do have to care. So with that, what am I trying to say? Seek the truth, speak the truth, and speak for the truth. This is your job as scientists. Everything you do as a scientist relies on this. And if you let that be compromised, everything you do will fall apart and will lose meaning. Remember that without each other, we're absolutely nothing. Okay? We have to take care of each other. Only by working together and supporting each other is the scientific community going to become what we can see it and want it to be. And please, please, please do remember, particularly during these recent months, that while the world is full of a lot of hate and challenge, there are still a lot of very good people in the world, and we should do everything we can to be one and support those who want to be as well. I also remind you, my one hero, if I have anything, that Joe Strummer said, "The future is unwritten." I had no idea of the life that I had before me. And that's what makes it fun. It's what makes it exciting. If I had to pick my career path, this wouldn't have been an option. So don't plan too hard. Don't think too much about where you're going to be in 15 years. That sounds careless and reckless, but just make good choices, okay? And be open-minded as you go. And anyone who tells you you can have everything in life, don't believe them. You can't have everything in life, okay? Everything comes with sacrifices, but you can have a little bit of everything, okay? This is my wife, my kids. We travel the world. We experience so many wonderful things because of science. And what I will tell you is science can make the best things in life even better. And I wish you the power. May the force be with you as you go forward pursuing your careers in science. I reiterate that if I had to do all of this all over again, I most certainly would. I would just take more math. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'd be happy to take any discussions with you. And I can see that I did go over, and I am so sorry for putting us over time. But I will answer any questions if anyone has any questions at the expense of going over, and I'm so sorry.
Yeah, we can take a couple of questions. Oh, can you hear me now?
Sorry, you're on mute.
How about now? We're good? Okay. So yeah, we can take a couple of questions. You guys just need to type them into the Q&A chat box on the bottom of your screen, and we can pose the questions to Dr. De La Cruz.
And you can ask me anything. They're going to edit the recording later if I say anything wrong.
You see there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can type your questions directly in there.
And if you don't have any questions, it's okay. And you feel free to share something. Feel free to disagree. Feel free to say, I feel the same way. It would help me a lot to know that my own sentiments are shared and haven't changed with a different generation.
We have one question here. What advice do you have for prospective applicants applying to graduate school during COVID?
Yeah, this is tough. One is make sure that they're accepting graduate students before you apply. Sorry to sound, every day I get sort of heartbroken realizing that there's some universities that are unable to take those graduate students because of the crisis. But the advice I would give is understand that the situation is unlikely to be normal when you start. You can still do a great deal of science. You have the advantage that things are not different for you. They are the way they are for you if you're starting. My advice would be to realize that there's a lot that can be done remotely and computationally. There's a lot of ways in which you can still build community and share the support with people, members of your lab, without being with them physically at every moment of the working day. We're all facing these challenges, and we're all adapting to the circumstances of COVID to allow us to do our jobs and our careers and research in ways that they're still productive. We're still learning this. And what will say I've learned, and the advice that I would give you, is to be patient. Things are harder. Things are a little more complicated. Everything runs a little bit more slowly. But I can see right now that we are still very productive. And we're still growing, and we're still working together. We still have our meetings together. We still, when I go to the lab every day, we still see each other. We just stay 6 feet apart. We have our discussions in slightly smaller groups. So all of the essential factors are there, and institutions are adapting for all of this. What you need to be aware of is find out ways in which you can be particularly productive, with the understanding that you are not going to be spending 16 hours in the lab with 10 other people. But you will still be able to work with those other people and work on your project. I think it's very exciting, and I myself have become better at working on projects that I don't actually have to work at the bench on.
Okay, one last question. This person says, thank you for your talk. It was very inspiring. How did you seek research and personal mentors early in your career as an undergrad or as a graduate student?
How did I'm sorry?
How did you find, I guess, supportive mentors?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'd like to say that I could identify good people, but I think they found me. I really think they found me, or at least I was able to see that they actually cared. Rutgers Newark, if you've never been there, it's an incredible place. The faculty are so committed to their students and their well-being. They are dedicated, and I think they found me. I didn't view professors as people that I should stay away from. I viewed professors as people that were there to show me the way, and that's what they want. A huge misconception that I think students, particularly undergraduate students, have, is that their professors don't really want to talk to them. The reality is they've chosen this because they want to interact with you. So reach out to them. Reach out to any of them. Not everyone's going to be a good mentor, but you will know who the good mentor is. They will find you. And someone may be a wonderful mentor for you and not so good for someone else. So it's a partnership. But I would say that they found me and demonstrated actual concern and care. And I see the questions now, so I didn't see that before. Okay, grad school. I agree with you. My old white mentors are supremely supportive of me, and I wouldn't be where I am today without their scientific coaching and overwhelming support of my whole being, and not just me as a scientist. Thank you. Chris, maybe you will need to remind people that, because those old white mentors are often not given the recognition that they deserve for the commitment and support that they've given many people, yourself included. oh, that was the one you just asked me. Oh,
Yeah, we're going to have to move on.
no, it's good. Perfect.
Okay.
Glad I don't get to talk about regrets. Yes.
Thank you so much for being so open and honest with all of us. My mom is actually from Cuba, and we share a very similar story, so it was nice to hear that. Just a couple of notes for our attendees. If you are staying for the how to apply to graduate school or to PhD programs, stay on this call. But if you want to attend the MD PhD workshop, please go back to the program that's available online and just click the link for the MD PhD workshop.
I think it's the reverse, actually.
Oh, it's the reverse. Sorry.
MD workshop is here, and then the how to apply to PhD programs that Dr. Robert Fernandez from Científico Latino is going to be presenting on will be in the second webinar link, which you can find in the program or in the Slack.
Thank you. Sorry about that. All right, thank you once again, Dr. De La Cruz. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me, and I'll check in a little bit later. Thank you so much, guys. Have a wonderful day.
Bye, thank you.
Be strong.
Thanks.